Cabinet has convened a special meeting to consider the best possible options to fund the 2025 budget. The tabling of the speech was delayed for the first time ever, following disagreements over a proposal to raise value-added tax. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana has now been mandated to select from the discussed options, while also considering the fiscal constraints of the country, ways to mitigate the impact on the poor, and ensuring that this budget supports economic growth. Quite the task. Let's get you a sense of what to think about in the lead up to this budget, expected in exactly a week's time. Bring in political economist Dr. McKinley, who's with us via our video link. Doc, it's lovely to see you. Thanks as always for making time to speak to us. And my goodness, the articles have been flying since this budget was postponed. The last update we had received is that it seemed there has been some kind of an agreement. We haven't been able to independently confirm that. But what also has emerged is the different permutations that might exist around ways to essentially raise that 58 billion rand that we need. Talks of a 0.75% VAT increase. And I wonder how far you reckon that would go.
Well, first of all, good morning, Yanda, and to your viewers as well. Always a pleasure. Yeah, listen, this is something that I think is necessary, this kind of debate, irrespective of the delays in terms of the budget speech. It points to how government raises revenue. And in this case, as you mentioned, there are many different options on the table. Yeah, my understanding is that they've come to some kind of agreement, but as you say, we don't know what. So let's look at some of those options. I mean, the VAT increase is the worst option as far as I'm concerned, and I think many South Africans are concerned because it's the most regressive tax of all. It affects you whether you're poor or whether you're a billionaire. It makes no difference. And as such, it really does punish those at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. So irrespective of whether that's a 0.75% increase or 1% or whatever, that is a politically unpalatable, I think, thing to do, even though the ANC government, at least the ANC side of the GNU, doesn't seem to want to bite the other side of this bullet, which is, for example, raising taxes on the wealthy. This is not something that has been really a big debate within the mainstream media, not surprising, because oftentimes they reflect those kinds of interests. And in that context, if one were to put, for example, a 1% wealth tax, a special wealth tax, or if one were to put capital gains taxes, or the range of other possibilities on that front. In other words, to basically take it from those who are at the top of the socioeconomic ladder as opposed to the bottom. Then another option which has been floated, of course, is the Government Employees Pensions Fund, and basically government taking a holiday for a year in terms of paying fully into that pension fund. That would release about 60 to 70 billion of funds, and that could take care of the hole that there are there. Now, of course, there are debates around whether that's a good idea, what kind of implications that would have for the pensions of the public servants and so forth. And then, of course, there's other taxes, the sin taxes, the kinds of usual things that we talk about in terms of alcohol and other kinds of goods that consumer goods that could be done, as well as fuel levy. And that's another area where the taxes. So there are many different options other than VAT.
Right. A lot of them do sound like taxing people nonetheless, but we'll get to all of that. I just want to go back to the very first point that you've made around VAT being regressive. It's an argument that's been well articulated, especially in literature. But I've heard government officials in the main responding to that by saying, well, if you actually increase the basket of goods that are exempt from tax, you actually do end up cushioning the poor. What's your response to that?
Sure, you can have zero-rated, a basket of zero-rated goods, and that's not a bad thing at all. But in the long term, whether it's a spaza shop or whether it's a Pick and Pay or Checkers or wherever other kinds of goods, a raise in VAT is going to have a regressive impact over time. So there could be some short-term, benefits to zero rating on bread, on mealie meal, on a range of other things, and that should happen, irrespective of what the tax rate, the VAT tax rate is. But what I wanted to surface, and what I was trying to surface in my comments, was the government has to tax. And the question is, where do you tax? That's the main source of raising revenue is taxes. And I think what we have experienced in South Africa is predominantly that our taxes have come from the bottom up as opposed from the top down. And I think that's an ideological and political decision that needs to be taken. And this GNU, at least we'll see, but I don't think they're willing to grasp that nettle yet, that in order for, there's many of us that would argue that in order to grow our economy and in order to spur job investment, you need to basically pump liquidity into the market, into the economy. And in order to do that, you need to free up people's income and free up people's ability to spend as well as to purchase and to participate in the economy. You don't do that by taxing those that are least able to afford it more.
I hear that, but is it also not true that South Africa is, one of, well, let me rephrase that. South Africa has the highest taxes in the world, essentially, when you look at just how many people can pay tax and how much tax they're paying. There's that saying that you can't really tax yourself out of a sluggish economy, and perhaps that's where the issue really is.
Well, look, there is a degree of truth in that. But let's, for example, take the overall corporate tax rate. In 1995, when the ANC took over and we entered into the democratic era, the corporate tax rate was hovering around 40%. It's now in the upper 20s. So there's a lot of room to play with. The question is, what is our economic policy? If we believe that in order to spur investment and growth, you need to rely on the private sector, therefore you need to give them incentives, therefore you need to give them tax breaks, and it trickles down. This has been the macroeconomic policy. It hasn't worked. So this is the problem. We're not debating economic policies that have been really good and we're trying to get the mix right. We're basically saying that we have a structural problem in our economy and we need structural solutions to that. How do you then go about not just a question of taxes and raising money, but how do you go about redistributing opportunity and wealth in our country, because we have the highest inequality rates. So not necessarily the highest tax rates, but the highest inequality. That has to be dealt with, and the budget can be a tool to deal with it if it's taken seriously in terms of that redistribution. If we're simply saying that we're going to continue to rely on the top 2 or 3% of our population in order to spur economic growth, my opinion would be we're going to get stuck into this cyclical structural problem continuously as we have for the last 20 years.
Interesting. You could increase tax, or you could make it easier to collect the tax that people already pay, which is the other part of this argument. The finance minister really has an unenviable job of trying to manage all these different interests, including demands from SARS, who's asking for enhanced abilities, essentially, to be able to collect tax and increase compliance. Could that be a solution? And I'm asking this keeping in mind that whatever answer we get ultimately needs to be able to plug this gap as soon as possible. I'm not quite sure how quickly SARS, for example, will be able to increase compliance, even if that were to be the route we take.
It's a good question, Ayanda, and that's the other side of the coin, which is basically that we have a leaking economy. And what we mean by that, there's a lot of illicit financial flows. There's a lot of money that's leaving our country with false. We've seen all of this happening in the state capture years, but also increasingly now we talk about being world class. Well, we're world class when it comes to white collar crime. As the PricewaterhouseCoopers reports just showed us last year. So yes, there's massive room for better regulation, for better cracking down on illicit financial flows, on tax avoidance, on a whole range of things. But you're right, that's not going to happen overnight. But it's absolutely necessary. SARS needs to be given that regulatory powers. They need to be given the resources to go after. And who are most of those people? They're not, for example, the miners that were under Stilfontein. They're the kingpins, the people at the top, the people who are basically running the show, who are making these billions and robbing our fiscus of massive taxes. So absolutely. But in the longer term, the question of raising taxes also has to be set against the mismanagement and wasteful expenditure. If government, and this GNU in particular, is serious about what they say, which is cracking down on that, then what we have is a better scenario where you're not just raising better taxes, but you're spending your money wisely. And this has been our other problem on that side, is that we have a lot of money in this country. We're a wealthy country. The question is, how do we spend our wealth and who does it benefit?
Absolutely. It's about whose interests ultimately are safeguarded. And I suppose that's a good way of talking about the politics involved in all of this. Very quickly, Dr. McKinley, if you can, the DA coming out to claim victory when the budget was delayed the last time and immediately being accused of politicking. Their response was, well, We're a political party. This is what we do. But anyway, the question becomes, how worried should we be about that this is ultimately reduced to politics than economics?
Yeah, listen, I think we have to expect that in a coalition government. I mean, every party is going to try to claim victories, is going to try to get one up on the other. And I think that's just in natural terms. I wouldn't take it too seriously. The question is whether this GNU and the main parties that constitute this GNU are interested in basically doing what they said they were going to do from the beginning, which is to try to turn this economy around, which is to try to clean things up. That's the real question. And that is a political as well as an economic question. So we always have this conundrum. We have some decent policies, but we have the lack of political will because people are playing around. So we're going to find out very soon, and I think this year in particular, whether this GNU is serious about this or whether this is another round of politics.
Absolutely. Dr. Gail McKinley, always great speaking to you, sir. Thanks very much indeed for your insights.
Thank you.
Dr. McKinley is a political economist. Help us think about what to expect when this reconfigured budget is delivered this time next week. In fact, we'll be counting down the hours when we speak about this on Wednesdays in a week's time.